Norms of Nobility is by David Hicks. And I would just like to take a moment to brag about my hardcover copy that cost me less than $20.
That's probably why it's mentioned so often. It's Brandy bragging about her great find.
I just want to remind everyone that it's embossed with gold leaf on the front. Welcome to Scholé Sisters, the podcast for the classical homeschooling mama who seeks to learn and grow while she's helping her children learn and grow. Scholé Sisters is a casual conversation about topics that matter to those of us in the trenches of classical homeschooling who yearn for something more than just checking boxes and getting it all done. I'm your host, Brandy Wenzel. You can find me over at afterthoughtsblog.net, spreading my Charlotte Mason joy through blog posts, study guides, audios, and more. My co-hosts today are Pam Barnhill, Misty Winkler, and Abby Wall. Pam is a speaker, podcaster, blogger at pambarnhill.com, and author of 2 fabulous books, Better Together and Plan Your Year. Misty is a homeschooling mom of 5, including 1 graduate. She writes and podcasts at simplyconvivial.com and is the author of The Convivial Homeschool, Gospel Encouragement for Keeping Your Sanity While Living and Learning Alongside Your Kids, now available on Amazon. Abby is basically the queen of the Scholé Sistership. Abby is a country-living farmer, rancher, a loving wife, and mom of 5 who homeschools and reads whenever she can. On Monday, February 7th, our Excellent Marxmanship seminar started up in the Sistership. It's not too late for you to come and join us. Excellent Marxmanship is Marx with an X, and how he has made his marks, pun intended, on the world around us. Join us as we read Plutarch, the Communist Manifesto, and more. You'll be glad you did. Just go to scholésisters.com/sistership to sign up. Welcome back to Scholé Sisters. Today kicks off our 17th season of the show. This episode has been 6 years in the making. It's our 100th episode. In honor of 100 episodes and also over 1 million downloads, Misty went through and figured out our top 5 most referenced books. Today, we're sharing a little bit of the personal history of the podcast, and then we jump into these top 5 books and tell you why you should own them too. And so, without further ado, let's get to it. Today is pretty exciting because this is our 100th episode.
Woohoo!
I was like, please, somebody please cheer.
Hurrah!
I see, this is where I need one of those buttons where it's like, so exciting. So today's going to be a little bit different because we're not doing a Scholé every day because the whole thing at the end is going to feel like a big Scholé every day. So what I want us to start with today is a quick history of Scholé Sisters. So in honor of our 100th episode, we're going to look back a little bit, and Misty and Pam are going to have to start us off because I actually wasn't there at the very, very beginning.
She was not there.
No.
Okay.
Was it you and Sarah?
Yeah. Okay. So back at the very beginning, I am struggling with this one too, because, I'm old and it's been a while, but it was a brainchild of, I think it was Sarah and Misty who came up with it. And they just kind of pulled me along for the ride.
Well, I think it was all Sarah, actually, because I remember Sarah.
That's not surprising.
Yes. So this really excited extrovert came up with this idea and then kind of sucked us all into it.
So Sarah Mckenzie from Read Aloud Revival, because not everybody will know what Sarah we're talking about.
Yes. So Sarah Mckenzie, and this was before Read Aloud Revival.
Right.
Yes.
Came up with the idea for Scholé Sisters to be, at the time it was a group blog of classical homeschool moms, but she wanted it to be a group of different types of classical to kind of break classical out of, a rigid box, like you have to do this and it has to look like this. She wanted to show different ways that classical homeschooling could look like and be real. And so she had this idea of a group blog. I mean, I remember her talking to me about it on Voxer, but I think it was all right about the same time, because I remember her saying, I want it to be you and Brandy and Pam. And what do you think? I was like, let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah. She had been, so Teaching from Rest had been out, at least about 6 months, wouldn't you think, Misty?
Yeah. It was after Teaching from Rest.
Yeah. And she had been kind of traveling around the country with Dr. Perrin, speaking about Scholé at all of these different homeschool conventions and homeschool events and things like that. And so she was really steeped at that point in this idea of Scholé and what could restful learning look like in your home, and what could it look like in a classical model. And so that was really kind of where the idea came from.
Was that 2014?
It would have been good to look up. Yes, it was 2014.
Maybe we should have been prepared.
And so we kicked it off with a group blog series called You're More Classical Than You Think.
Still one of my favorites.
It is. But then it kind of floundered because we all had our own blogs, and it was very confusing to try to figure out what belonged where.
Yes.
And then Sarah started Read Aloud Revival.
Which, for the record, I was like, that's a terrible idea.
Hey, wait a second now.
No, really, I will never forget the day on Voxer where she's like, I think I'm going to go all in with reading aloud. And I'm like, to myself, really? I'm really glad I didn't actually say it out loud because I was so wrong.
Who would listen to a podcast just about reading aloud?
Yeah, that was what I thought. I had no vision.
Talking about books? Who wants to talk about books, Brandy?
So Sarah left, and then I was like, well, I don't really want this to end just because she has something else to do. And so then I thought, well, what I think would really be fun is if we had a podcast, because we always had these good discussions on Voxer.
Yes.
And I thought, I want an excuse to have more conversations with my friends.
Yes. Well, it took about a year.
Yeah.
So Sarah needed to drop Scholé Sisters, and Brandy cried and said, but can we still have Scholé Sisters? So Brandy rescued it.
That's right.
But podcasts still weren't really a thing. I think Sarah was just starting hers, but we made Scholé Sisters an email newsletter that I sent out.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
For about a year, I think. And so it was just I would send out links to our different blog posts. So then that was an attempt to try to not have it writing in multiple places. But
yeah, well, you always wrote a little, or one of us did, we took turns, but somebody would always write a little introduction at the top, some kind of little something in the email. And then at the bottom, there would be all the little links down there to the different places. So it lived like that for a while.
Until it looked like podcasting was a thing. And Brandy was like, wait a second, this is like being on the radio.
That's right. So my childhood dream has come true.
Well, and I think one of the neat things that makes Scholé Sisters different than any other podcast, because this is what I've done 4 or 5 other ones besides this one. I lose count.
Podcast-aholic
in the app. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is number 5. But it's different because it's not just one person interviewing somebody else, or it's not just one person, doing one of those audio blogs, or one person just, now 10 minutes to a better homeschool is just me talking, right? And so it's not just one person, it's all of us. And that's the conversation. And so I think that's different than anything any of us have ever done anywhere else. And that's what makes it cool to me.
And that's what makes it easy to decide what to put where. To go back to our original dilemma, it was different enough that we weren't all like, should this be on Scholé Sisters or somewhere else? Because that was our big dilemma over and over and over again. Kind of solved that problem too. So that was, I just looked this up. Our very first episode it came out January 23rd, 2016.
Okay.
So that would be almost 6 years ago? I guess so. Wow.
Wow.
We're so old.
And it took you all this long to get 100 episodes.
Right. That's right. Hey.
We're busy homeschooling over here. Give us a break.
I agree. Quality content.
Quality takes time.
That's right. It does.
So we did that. And then we added retreats soon after that. Was it that same year?
Yes. No. Our first retreat was 2017.
So it took us like a year and a half from there to add our retreat.
And a big part of that was that not all of us had definitely not all ever met at the same time.
Right.
And
I had never met Pam.
No.
Right.
And I had never met Misty at that point.
Right. Yeah. That was the first time we met in person.
Yeah. Brandy, are you sure we hadn't met at a GHC?
I think I started speaking at GHC after that.
Okay.
So I think I had seen Sarah. I can't remember where I saw Sarah, but then I saw Misty at one of the Charlotte Mason, isn't it like Charlotte Mason
They're
Northwest
in
or something, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Charlotte Mason West.
The year before.
Yeah.
It was recent.
Yeah. We had just seen each other for the first time. So we added retreats.
We tried a forum.
Yeah, we did. Mm-hmm. That was Sistership version 1.
Which I was active in.
Oh, Abby, you were active in that one?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Abby probably made half the posts.
Yep. I was all in early on.
That girl.
So.
That is how we ended up with Sistership 2.0, which is where Abby became our queen.
Well, and actually we met Abby at that very first retreat.
Yes,
also,
we did.
At our very first meetup.
Yep.
Yeah.
I always love the way you put it, Abby. You're like, I was pretty sure you should meet me.
I knew you needed to meet me because I knew you'd want to be my friends. Like, I had listened to enough of your stuff to realize that I would fit in just right. And then I decided to meet you because I wanted to take I wanted to stop being a stalker. You know, that's kind of how I felt about it. So if they met me, then it would feel less awkward when I was, talking about my friends from the internet.
Right. I know. You know what? The biggest relief about all of us meeting was that Cy quit calling Pam my fake friend. Because you were the only. That's why I know I hadn't met you until then, Pam, is because that's when he quit calling you that. I think he really didn't know what to do once he didn't have a way of mocking us.
And I know my husband appreciated it because then I had other people to discuss books with.
Yeah.
And he didn't have to listen to my very long narrations.
Right. Good for marriages.
Yeah, it is.
The sistership, saving marriages. So let's see. We brought on Abby 2 years ago?
In 2020. So we had her as a guest on the podcast in 2019.
Right.
Oh, actually, it was at the end. Sometime in 2019, Pam threatened to leave us.
I did.
We had to give her a spanking.
Then so Brandy and I were panicking.
Yeah. I was like, this is Hotel California. You can come in, but you can't leave. Sorry.
I don't know. I think a lot of people have shown the opposite of that this year.
Good point. So we brought on Abby kind of like part-time, I would say. And then we brought her on full-time at the beginning of 2021.
Well, I had to be vetted and you had to make sure that it would work.
Right.
And it wasn't, a total failure.
Yeah.
So that was it. They didn't tell me they were going to bring me in. They just asked me to be a guest. So
that's right.
it was trial.
It was an interview.
That's right.
Yeah, there we go.
You just didn't know.
That's nice.
Okay. That is our brief history of how we got to where we are today. So we're very excited about our next 100 episodes, which will only take us about 7 years.
I don't know. How old is your youngest, Brandy? Because
he has 6 more years of school. He's in 7th.
Yeah. Okay. Another 7 years.
Yeah. Well, when I was so my oldest is our podcast engineer. And when I mentioned to him that we're recording our 100th episode, the first thing he said was, GHC just did their 300th. Like, oh, whoop-de-doo.
Okay, well, just so you know, they got that with the number already in the bag,
Because you did like 100 before you handed it over, right?
I probably did well over 100 before they took the Homeschool Solution show over. So I'm just saying.
Yeah.
So, boy, does that mean by the time of the next 100, most of us are going to be mostly graduating our kids? Whew. That's weird.
We'll all be on like hormone replacement therapy by then.
Speak for yourself. I am young. So
anyway, I really was speaking for myself. Okay, so I put in here, but I don't know if any of you actually prepared for it. What is your favorite episode that you have ever been on?
I have 3.
Oh, good for you.
I do too.
Okay, go for it.
I'll just start with one for now. Okay, so the Christmas Carol episode.
Classic.
Because
it was so much fun.
It was so much fun. It was just so much fun to drive Brandy crazy.
After all these years, I'm still crazy about it.
And having said that, I was probably wrong.
Oh, Pam, don't go back on me now.
Repentance is a beautiful thing. Oh.
So we beat poor Brandy up about A Christmas Carol, that whole episode, which was a lot of fun. It was just a lot of fun to beat her up.
It was really fun. I've never enjoyed being a punching bag more.
But I had so many people send me things after the episode. One was a lecture by Dr. Anthony Excellent, and then there were some other things. And I'm like, maybe I need to revisit this and think about it a little more. But yeah, that was a favorite. That was just a really fun one to record.
That was fun. The funny thing about it was that I had no clue that you guys were going to do that. And so I had prepared for a completely different episode. So I was just like whirling in my mind the whole time. And afterward, when I was editing, I was like, well, why didn't I say? Yeah, I didn't say any of the things I should have said. So I got emails afterwards that was like, basically like, what's wrong with you? How could you not defend this better? And I'm like, I was woefully unprepared. It was terrible.
It was an ambush.
It really was. They ganged up on me. Okay, what else?
That was fun.
Yeah.
Well, I think my favorite episode was with Susan Weisbauer, because that's just amazing that we had that opportunity. And I think that was probably the episode I was most nervous to record. And then it was so much fun, and she was so great to talk to and just put the whole conversation at ease, and it was a lot of fun. So I wasn't nervous as soon as it started, just because it was an easy conversation.
She's very easy to talk to.
That was great.
I don't know. She still intimidates me. Her and Andrew Pudewa, I get nervous every time. I can like walk up and just, well, no, not really well. Andrew Pudewa makes me nervous, and he's the nicest guy.
What about you, Abby?
So I have, both of mine I have 2 that I just loved, which were both with Karen's. And since poor Karen's name has been dragged through the mud in the last 2 years, I've decided to just really highlight the best Karen's that we've had. Karen Glass, and it's episode 67, Death by Sticker Chart. She just has such an interesting way of thinking about things and how she applies Charlotte Mason and classical. And she just is so well read. And I just loved talking with her. And then Revived by Reading with Karen Harris, number 93. So podcast 93. And her story was just pretty amazing. And how she took Susan Weisbauer's, the well-educated mind, and just started doing it, and has been doing her own education for the past, I don't know how many years now, but just faithfully doing it and not getting bogged down, and just reading all the hard books and doing it with a joyful heart. And it just revived her. So I loved both of those.
That was an incredible episode. I wasn't on it, but I listened to it to do the show notes. I had to stop it every 2 seconds, while doing the show notes. I'm like, Well, she's just saying one amazing thing after another. I have to write that down.
Really. I know. I was like, if we ever like have a problem, we should just have her back on and she'll fix it. We've lost all inspiration. She's like walking inspiration, that woman.
Yes.
I mean, she takes reading widely, thinking deeply, and applying faithfully. And she does it. Then that's what she's been doing for years. And that episode just highlighted all of those things. So,
yeah. I had a really hard time choosing what I was going to say. So I'm going to choose ones though that were, I kind of had like this tentative list in my head. So you guys covered a lot of them. So I'm just going to touch on a couple that haven't been mentioned. And one was episode 79 with Ravi Jain, East Meets West, Classical Education in China. And that was just, to me, it was so inspiring to learn about Christian people who are willing to really make sacrifices to make this happen in a way that we can't even really imagine.
Yes.
And it really drove home to me, like, what is the nature and the essence of the tradition and why does it matter? And it was just such a good conversation and really got me thinking about things in ways that I hadn't thought about them before, I don't think. So I appreciated what Robbie had to say in that one. And then I really feel, I mean, this is kind of like a collection, but the ones we did on Dorothy Sayers were just totally fun.
That was on my list too, because we all went into that first episode. Like, well, I guess we went into the reading for that first episode thinking we were going to do something totally different. And then we all ended up liking her so much.
True.
So it was another like fun, surprising episode. So that one was on my list too.
So there were two of them. We did the Sisters on Sayers, which I can't remember the episode number for that one. But then Gainsaying Sayers was episode 54.
And Brandy, didn't we go into that thinking we were only going to do the one episode? Yeah. And then we recorded it and it was like, whoa, wait a second. This was not, we were all too lovey-dovey and liking her too much. So now we need to come back and actually, add a little interest. And So, yeah.
I think together they're a good episode.
Yeah.
Well, and the Gainsaying Sayers one is the one we had to record twice because we lost the first one.
And I was like, possibly that was the Lord's discipline for us. I forgot about that though. You're right. Okay. I was going to briefly list our top 5 downloaded episodes of all time, though we do kind of have to take this with a grain of salt because the way that stats are done has been perfected over time. And so it's kind of hard to know for sure. There was a period of time where when the Apple Watch came out, anything that was over about 20 minutes was counted as a download every 20 minutes. So like one of our episodes would have been downloaded like probably 3 times instead of just once, if that makes sense. But there's no way of knowing how many people were on an Apple Watch listening. So we don't know how skewed it really was, which is kind of interesting. So, and by the way, Angelina is like still our most popular episodes, I would say, overall.
Oh yeah.
Episode 44. This is number 5. Prioritizing Words with Angelina Stanford. Episode 49. The Sisters on Sayers. Not the podcast you expected. Episode 33. Narration, The Act of Knowing with Karen Glass.
Nice.
Episode 78. Pursuing the Classical Education You Never Received with Susan Weisbauer. And our number one all-time highest downloaded episode is episode 60, History as a Center Cannot Hold with Angelina Stanford. So she is in 2 of our top 5.
Oh, nice. Wow.
Yeah.
With that top one was a lot of fun. That was just a hoot.
It really was. She was in rare form.
She was. So that's worthy of being episode number 1.
Amen. I agree.
Hi, Abby here to tell you about the Sistership. Homeschooling is important work, but it can feel overwhelming, wear us out, and take up so much of our time. Though it is hard work, it is good work. We all need real encouragement, supportive and truthful words, and discussions that engage our minds. Burnout is real. Discouragement happens in every homeschool. Our goal is to help moms combat burnout with Scholé. Sistership is the place for classical Christian homeschoolers to connect locally and online. We exist to help homeschool moms overcome exhaustion and confusion with refreshing, sound, and invigorating learning. We want to equip moms to connect with local and online community and help connect with big ideas that apply to homeschooling that are broad and liberal in scope. We strive to provide smart and stimulating content for the classical homeschooling mom. We won't waste anyone's time. Join today at scholasisters.com/sistership for free.
So now, speaking of top fives, we're going to talk about the top 5 most referenced books in our first 100 episodes. So these are the books that we keep coming back to. We're going to do this kind of Scholé everyday style. We'll name the book, and talk too much about why we like it and make you want to buy it. And as we say, it's not a real episode until somebody buys a book. But we may not be buying books because we actually own everything on the list today.
Thank goodness.
You, dear listeners, are going to have to make this a real episode. Number 5 with 10 mentions. Okay. Oh, by the way, how'd you do this? Is this 10 episodes it's mentioned in?
Yes.
Is that what it is? Okay. So yes. 10 different episodes.
10 episodes.
So this is funny because this is the book we're like, we've never talked about it before. The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis.
Well, we never, until this last season, we haven't had an episode just about abolition.
Right. It was more a concept. Yeah.
So we now have 2 episodes based on reading abolition, but we had mentioned it before as a source in other conversations.
Well, and really we could come back to it because actually those 2 episodes are just on the first essay.
That's true.
We still have more work to do, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Pam, would you like to do the honor of praising this book since you are on first name basis with it?
Oh, it's awesome. And, I think it's just so relevant today. I mean, just as relevant, if not more, than when C.S. Lewis wrote it back in it was a series of essays that he did, I believe, in the late 40s, early 50s. And wonderful things about education, if you dig in there and about what education says and what it means and what it doesn't say and doesn't mean. And
is this your all-time favorite education book? Like, if you could pick only one that's like your book, is this your? I always feel like this is your book.
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, maybe. It is one that I go back to again and again. And I feel like I have to reread it. And I feel like even though I've read it 3 or 4 times, I've barely scratched the surface.
Yeah.
So,
Agreed.
It's something I definitely, it's my hard book that I like to come back to.
Yeah. Lewis is like that. It's like, I can read it, but then when you come back again, it's like you've never read it before. It just is so striking. And I think the first time Abolition of Man was mentioned on Scholé Sisters was as Pam's Scholé Everyday. Or Scholé RDA, as it was called back in those days.
Don't say that or Brandy will mess up again.
That's true. It's only taken me like 3 years to get out of the habit of saying it that way. I was trying to see if there was a good quote from Abolition that we could read before moving on.
Well, I always think of the phrase, it's the irrigating deserts, right?
Oh, I just found it. You want me to read it?
Yeah.
Okay. For every one pupil who needs to be guarded from a weak excess of sensibility, there are 3 who need to be awakened from the slumber of cold vulgarity. The task of the modern educator is not to cut down jungles, but to irrigate deserts.
Yeah.
And then I double underlined the sentence right after that. The right defense against false sentiments is to inculcate just sentiments. Okay. Number 4, the liberal arts tradition.
Woo-hoo. Ooh, both versions.
That's right. Which I will repeat. I loved the first one, but the extra chapters at the back are well worth, in my opinion, investing in the second edition.
Well, and it's not just the added essays in the back that's different either. It's really reworked and very good.
So why do we love this book so much? Why do we keep coming back to it?
It takes the classical education tradition and the desire for a classical education, and doesn't make it superficial or too simplistic. Like, just do X, Y, Z, and you'll have a classical education. It really does dig into a mindset shift about education that's at the heart of the classical revival.
And I love that they have a gymnastics section.
Of course you do.
Which surprises no one.
I like the tree.
That's right. The tree image at the front of the book. And then it shows back up as they talk about it. But yeah, that is beautiful.
And actually, it is really quotable too.
Yeah.
They did a really good job. I was listening to some of our older episodes when we were talking about the liberal arts tradition, and it gives a lot of food for thought.
Mm-hmm.
It gave me more to think about. And I like going back to that and looking at my, annotations and things.
A lot of the modern books on classical education tend to fall into different kinds of camps that boil down to methods. Like, we do this and therefore that's classical. Kevin Clark and Ravi Jain were able to transcend those distinctions and get at what really unites classical education, whether you're in this school or that school, of how it's worked out.
So the liberal arts tradition is where we get that PG mapped framework.
Yeah.
And that's what's in the tree that Pam was referencing. I mean, all of the different components of that framework are in the tree. So the P stands for piety, and they actually have that as like the soil that the tree grows in. And I'm going to briefly say what each of them are, but I want to come back to that idea about piety. So they have the G is Abby's favorite, gymnastic. And then the M is music, which is more like poetic mode. It's not literal music. And then the A is arts, for 7 liberal arts. And then for the P, again, on the other side, we have philosophy and then theology. Did I get all the letters? For some reason that felt harder than it should be.
Yeah.
One of the things that I loved about this was their emphasis on the tree being rooted in piety.
Mm-hmm.
So many of those sort of like system approaches to classical education that you were talking about, Misty. Well, and there was even a guy that wrote, I think it was the guy behind the tree drawing, right? Like, he wrote an article for my blog about this idea that you could actually adopt one of those frameworks and have a completely secular perspective. A lot of those frameworks that are based on methods are not philosophical minded, really. Mm. And so they're actually not rooted in faith. He felt like you really could just have a completely secular education if you followed one of those systems. Like, it was, the faith became optional because of the way it was presented. He was at some conference and he felt like when Ravi Jain and Kevin Clark first presented because I think they presented it at a conference before they wrote their book, if I remember his article correctly. The way I always imagine it is like this relief of like, this is what I've been looking for. This is what I've needed. I needed a Christian classical education, not just like a to-do list classical education. Anyway, I just thought it was a very beautiful, but also timely thing that needed to happen back in the day.
Here's a quote that kind of sums all that up. Grounded in piety, Christian classical education is the transmission of the culture of the church through a faculty of friends who love the truth by cultivating virtue in the students in body, heart, and mind, and nurturing their love for wisdom and faithful service of the Lord Jesus Christ.
That's awesome.
Love it. Okay, number 3, the Great Tradition that has been in 17 different episodes. Oh, I don't know if I said liberal arts tradition had been in 16 episodes. So Great Tradition, 1 by 1, 17 different episodes.
And now I've been put to shame. So I started this book the year that the podcast started in 2016. And it was my very first Schole RDA on episode number 1. Yes.
Wow.
And I have not finished it yet. And now this whole group inside Sistership, they've made it a project and they've read it this year. And I didn't keep up. And now there's this whole group of people who've finished it, and I still haven't finished it.
Yes, they finished it, discussed it monthly. Dawn Garrett, shout out to Dawn Garrett for leading that.
That's right.
And she made that a 5x5 category. So the whole book counted. Basically, they broke it down into kind of this quarterly plan, and they all read the book. And I mean, it's amazing. Their discussions, and then inside Sistership, they have quoted things and how they've been so surprised by these writers. And they're even talking about a spin-off project for next year, reading some of these authors more in depth, or the antithesis to the great tradition, trying to find, the modern secular.
Do we?
Yeah.
Yeah. And seeing the other one. So it's amazing.
You want to describe the book?
Yeah. So the Great Tradition is a collection of excerpts from influential educators from Plato to the modern times. I forget where it ends. You just get 5 to 7 pages of excerpts from great works. And so you can get a flavor for what the author was dealing with and thinking through, but you just read the portions that are applicable to this project of educating the human mind and soul. And so it's kind of interesting to see the different takes over time.
There's also all these similarities as you go along.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you can see how. What was I reading the other day that was talking? Oh, he was in Norms and Nobility, actually, where it was talking about how tradition works. There's like all these good things for your generation, and then everything's kind of sifted. And what's really worthy is what actually gets passed on to, ideally at least, what actually gets passed on to the next generation. And all the other stuff that, may have even been fine, like good in its own, but it was for that time. It was not for all time. Those are the kind of things that kind of fall away. They burn away like dross, and, so we're left with this like refining. And I feel like we can see that in the Great Tradition, where you can read someone and you see like all of their great ideas that are timeless. And then there's some things where you're like, really? But those actually aren't the things that made it to the next guy and the next guy and the next guy. Like the ones that you kind of think, what? They're just that guy locked in his time.
Yeah, it's like seeing the great conversation in action.
Yes.
What I love about it is it never fails us. If we're like, oh, we're going to discuss this or we're going to discuss that, we can always find something in there to read, which only makes our podcast episodes better.
That's right. Yeah. There's always something to argue about with this book.
Yes.
Well, and we can all own this one book, but reference different authors. Yes. and we can all use the same page numbers and say, okay, we're reading this part and discussing this part. And so that makes it great to just have one book to go to.
Yeah, for sure.
I think we figured out that Richard Gamble, the editor, did his own translation for a lot of it. And so that makes a big difference as well. Everyone reading the same translation, and he did a really great job. It's very readable.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to find a quote for us. I have so many things underlined.
Mm-hmm. Well, and part of what keeps me from finishing it is that I got, close to halfway through, and then I were reading some earlier part for a podcast, and I started a color coding system.
Oh, geez.
We're like, okay, every time it talks about multa, non-multa, or something like that, or it talks about virtue, I put a colored flag. So then it's like, okay, we're going to do an episode on virtue. I don't have to go read the whole thing or what okay, these are the parts that I noticed we're talking about virtue, and I could just turn to them. But then that makes it kind of an elaborate process to read
So you paralyzed yourself, is what you're saying.
I did. I really did.
An audiobook? That's what you need, Misty. You need an audiobook.
Oh, I do.
There is not. There is not. That was one of the big questions in Sistership. Like, have they ever read this? And the answer is no. I think it's a small demographic that this book is really touching.
Geared for.
Yeah.
Imagine the project of reading this out loud. Whew.
Yeah.
That's a lot of hours.
I would do it. I love to read aloud. I would totally do it.
When, Brandy? When would you do it?
in all my spare time that I have. I was thinking we should probably mention that one of the reasons why this one has so many mentions is very deliberate, because we actually try to have one episode based upon something in the great tradition each season.
Yes.
Because we want to refer to, real historical traditional works.
Mm-hmm.
And if any general listener buys this book, then they are able to refer back to we can mention the page numbers and they can look it up too, which is way better than, owning 25 different books. And I don't know, there are way more authors than that in here, but
yeah,
it makes it an easy to refer to reference.
Yeah.
Where you can refer to multiple authors in one book and all have the same page numbers. So that's convenient for us. But then, it's great too for listeners who really want to dig into it. It's like, here, this is the book. It's just excerpts. We refer to page numbers, read what Aristotle actually said, or, find out who Xenophon is and just read, these few pages. And it is so helpful to just ground yourself in the great works of the past.
Mm-hmm. So I have something that I marked as Schole. It's in the Cicero section from Pro Archia Poeta. And he says, do you think that I could find inspiration for my daily speeches on so manifold a variety of topics did I not cultivate my mind with study? Or that my mind could endure so great a strain did not study to provide it with relaxation? And I always thought about that as kind of the essence of what Schole Sisters is all about. That when you read the right things, those ideas just kind of grab a hold of your soul and they provide a different kind of rest, because it was a work to do the reading.
Right.
But it's like you just took this superfood that gave you this burst of inspiration because it just naturally wants to grow and mature in your life. So that's my quote.
One of the ways my husband likes to mock the effort here, besides the fake friend thing, internet friends, is like, oh, yeah, Schole, that's people who call work leisure. Is
that wrong?
An idea of leisure is work. Like, but work of a different kind, a different nature.
That's right. Okay, so for our number 2 and number 1, we actually have a tie.
Yeah.
Leisure, the basis of culture, and norms of nobility. So I'll have us do norms of nobility first, because leisure, the basis of culture it's our title.
Mm-hmm.
It's our title.
It's where we get the idea and the word Schole.
Yeah. So it deserves to be number 1. Norms of Nobility is by David Hicks. And I would just like to take a moment to brag about my hardcover copy that cost me less than $20.
That's probably why it's mentioned so often. It's Brandy bragging about her great find.
I just want to remind everyone that it's embossed with gold leaf on the front. And did I mention it was less than $20? Okay.
I had to ask for mine for a Christmas present because I had a hard time justifying spending that much money on a book.
Yeah.
And my in-laws are always very generous. And so they bought me that book.
Aww.
It was like probably my best Christmas gift ever, because not only did they give me Norms and Nobility, but they're like, well, that's not all the money we were going to spend. So what else do you want? And I was like, weightlifting shoes. And so they got me weightlifting shoes and Norms and Nobility. It seriously was my best Christmas ever.
So it was like physical weightlifting and intellectual weightlifting.
Yes, exactly.
That's amazing.
One thing I noticed as I was figuring out these mentions and where we talked about these books and how many times and all that is almost every one of our first 10 or so episodes, our first 2 seasons, Norms and Nobility got mentioned a lot. And then it kind of dwindled. We're really, I don't know if it's not top heavy. We mentioned it a lot in the beginning and we haven't in any of the recent episodes.
I don't know about you, but I haven't read it in
it's been a while since
4 years or something.
It was our Schole every day mentions a few times in those early episodes. So that, we were reading it. And I know I at least one book club.
Yeah.
I think I've done 2 book clubs on it in the last 6 years. So I noticed that the time frame is like when that's what I was reading, it's what I was bringing to the conversation.
Right.
And same with everyone else. You can see that first a book will be a Scholé everyday mention, and then it will like inform conversations on all those episodes around the same time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I was in the book club, and that's the only way I finished Norms and Nobility, because the discussions actually made it very understandable. I mean, it really, truly helped me to be able to finish it and to understand things. So I definitely recommend reading it with a friend.
I just want to say that book club was way too late for my time.
Yeah, that's true. Poor Pam.
Dawn Garrett made it through, and she's even later than I am.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, no.
That's impressive right there.
She's younger than I am.
I just fell in love with Norms and Nobility from the first page, and I probably read it, I don't know how many times, at least 5 times, but I'm thinking closer to 10 actually in those early years after I got my copy. So, I mean, I got my copy, I think around the time that my youngest was born, and he's 13. So I've had it for a long time, because I remember trying to read it when my husband was in the hospital and realizing I was reading the same sentence over and over again.
It's okay. The one sentence was worth it.
It really was. That is so true. But it's funny because you may have heard, but I read a lot of Charlotte Mason. And
surprisingly did not make it on the top 5.
I was so happy. I was so happy.
That's evidence that I do try. I remember though reading this book, and I had read a ton of Charlotte Mason before I got this book. And, people would say things like, well, Charlotte Mason is child-led. And I would be like, no, I've read her. She's not child-led. But then trying to figure out, it's like I didn't have the vocabulary to have the discussion about why she wasn't. And in David Hicks's prologue to Norms and Nobility, I think it's in the prologue, it's either that or chapter 1, he goes after the idea of child-led education. It was like he gave me the language to think through the idea that it's not that there's nothing to your child following their own interests, but education is where we're calling them to something that they're not, or that they're not yet. And that for me was like a really powerful thought. It was like I had the hints of it from things I had read, but I just didn't have the framework in my mind to be able to put words to it. And so he just really turned me around in so many ways. I would love it if someone could explain what a norm even is. Because I feel like, we see the word nobility and we kind of have this idea that something or someone could be noble, that it's a characteristic that something could have. But I was actually mystified by the word norms going into reading this book.
The other word that he uses in the book is ideal.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going into the project of education, looking towards an ideal, a norm, a type that you're aiming for. What is an educated person? Education isn't, or ought not be, just about cultivating skills or helping each individual become something individual and specialized, but helping the student conform more and more to an ideal, which is a norm. We can hear the word normal.
It's a standard.
A standard. Yeah, exactly. So with a standard in mind that you might never attain, but it gives you the direction to go.
Yes. Hey, I just found my child-centered learning quote. I was wrong. It was not in the preface. It's in the chapter Teaching the Father of the Man. But he says, child-centered learning is a high-sounding euphemism for his refusal to admit a connection between what makes a person virtuous and what constitutes an educated person. Consequently, his child-centered education produces the exact opposite of an educated person, a self-centered adult. And I actually thought the idea that self-centeredness is a sign of being uneducated was very profound.
Oh, yeah.
I've been thinking about that a lot, and about how possibly the work of trying to help our children combat selfishness is one of the core things when it comes to doing their education properly. So it's a thought I've been developing lately. Anyway, I love Norms and Nobility. So good.
It is good. And, it has a hurdle, a comprehension hurdle for sure. It's not written for normal people like us. No. Like it was written as David Hicks' thesis, right? His doctoral
I think so.
thesis.
Yeah.
It was written for academics. So it isn't easy to understand, but it is worth the effort.
I feel like the favor that David Hicks has not yet done the world that he really should do is the layperson's version of that book.
I know.
Yeah.
Even just reprinting this one would be awesome because then it wouldn't be $50.
That is also true.
I don't know though. I think it's $50 because it's more of it's like a textbook. It's more of a textbooks are always more expensive. So.
That's true. Okay, so anything to say about Norms and Nobility before we move on to Leisure, the Basis of Culture?
I just want to throw it out there for all the real people that I have not finished it.
It's okay. We still love you.
Right. So, if you're sitting out there going, I've tried to read that book and it's hard and I just haven't, it's okay. I haven't either.
Okay. Number 1 is our title, Leisure, the Basis of Culture, which is where we get the word scholé. And we have had actual episodes on this book, right? Like we did the one on...
Yes.
I'm trying to remember. I just remember rolling the R in ratio.
We have a few on ratio and intellectus. One of them is with Dr. Perrin.
I think is why in the follow-up I was rolling the R because Dr. Perrin rolls the R.
He does.
I was imitating the best of us. Ratio.
Or trying.
It wasn't very effective, but I did try. There is more than one translation out there of Leisure, the Basis of Culture. And if I remember correctly, I don't really love mine. I don't know. What translation are you guys reading? Mine's
let me look.
Malmesbury.
Okay, let me look.
I think that's the wrong one.
I think so, because I have this distinct recollection of I was reading it. We were in this book club with Cindy Rollins 1 million years ago. I was reading it and I was having such a hard time. And then people would write these posts and I'm like, where did they get that? And it was like everybody was reading this other translation. But I bought mine because the introduction was by Roger Scruton and I thought that meant it was good.
So I have the forward with James V. Shaw.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's a different translation.
And mine was published in 2009.
Translated by Alexander Drew.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I think that's the one you want. I'm pretty sure.
Yes. Yeah. That's the one I have, although it's a different edition and does not have any kind of impressive forward.
That's too bad. So, Leisure, the Basis of Culture. In our show notes, Misty will list the episodes that we've done that cover this. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but he's the guy. Joseph Pieper is our guy. And he's the one who ties this idea of not really reading, but like encountering truth as being a form of rest, being the ultimate form of rest. And so often we think that we want to do something where we are checked out in order to restore ourselves. But checking out actually means we're not accessing truth in that moment. We all have times where we check out. I'm not even saying it's possible to not check out, but I felt like it was very revolutionary to learn that sometimes I needed to not check out. I needed to check in to something way bigger than myself.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't thinking that way as a young mom. Pieper just turned me around. Anything anybody wants to say about this book? Or any quotes that you would like to read?
Like you were saying, when I was a young mom and at home with lots of little kids and everything like that, and just diving into the reading really, really helped me because so many times when you can't go places, or if you do, you taking all the kids, it's really hard, but you still need that intellectual stimulation. And sometimes the only thing you can do is pick up a book and read it. Now, would it be great if you could discuss it with people? Absolutely. But sometimes that's not a possibility. So when I read Leisure, the Basis of Culture, that was just confirming those things. Like there was a reason I was hungering for books and reading and looking at the bigger picture, like you were saying, Brandy.
I did find a quote. One of the things we all have gone around and around in circles over the years talking about is this tension between this idea of the apprehension of truth being a form of leisure and rest with the idea that you have to do work to get there. And I think that's the essence, Misty, of where Matt's joke comes from about us redefining work as leisure or as rest. Mm-hmm. So it's a very real tension. I'm going to read from the bad translation because I did underline it. Pieper talks about this, and he talks about this idea that realizations of knowing have to be preceded by an exceptional effort of thought. But then he says, in any case, the effort would not be the cause, but rather a necessary condition for knowing. And the holy effortlessness of the action of charity would also be connected with previous and heroic exercise of the will. The important part is the next thing. Knowing means that the reality of existing things has been reached. It does not consist in the effort of thought or intellectual work. I think actually he's talking about the poetic mode. If we get into like the idea of music in the liberal arts tradition as that thing on the tree that is kind of other. It's outside the liberal arts. It's outside piety. So he's saying that it's that knowing, it's that encounter with reality, with truth that is our rest, which obviously ties into this idea that ultimately the ultimate reality is God, is Christ. And so that's why it would be rest. He helped us balance that difference. We do have to work hard. You have to read the hard thing or work through the hard places. But that part of it isn't really the scole part. The scole part is when you know and the light bulb turns on and you've apprehended the full beauty of truth. That's when it's all worth it, because that's when you encounter this restful moment.
And we actually have a few episodes. There's one called The Intersection of Effort and Rest. But we've talked about it on several episodes, that distinction between rest requiring some or being built upon some effort. And then there's also the other angle with amusing ourselves to leisure.
Right.
Which was an episode we did early on. One thing I was noticing as I was researching for this episode was how that was a recurrent theme in the podcast, actually.
I think it's tension that can be easy to over-focus on one side or the other. We want rest to the point where maybe we're willing to skip the work part of it, or we're doing a lot of work and we're not getting to the rest. And so it's frustrating. I feel like that's just like a constant tension in the homeschool, and it changes as children grow and change. Mm-hmm. What was doing it for you before and making you feel like you had this beautiful scole-centered homeschool suddenly disappears when everybody gets a year older or something. I feel like that's a reason why it keeps coming up, is because it's not like you get into some sort of rhythm and you can just stay there for years and years on end. All right. Does anybody have anything else they want to say about leisure before we do our runner-up?
Nope.
Nope.
Okay. One of the reasons why I want to do runner-up is because I'm predicting that this will be in the top 5 by the next time we do an episode like this, like in 7 years. So this little book, Misty sent it to me for my birthday, right? Didn't you?
Yes, I did, because I knew you were never going to buy it, but you needed it.
And I didn't know what it was, so I didn't know how badly I needed it. And then I read it and I was like, oh my goodness, she was right. So right, which is, I mean, like half of my life has just been realizing how right Misty is. Mm-hmm. So
I loved recording podcasts with you.
So this is The Intellectual Life. It's Spirit, Conditions, Methods, translated from the French. And it is by A.G. Serdelange. And it is so good. It is a smaller size of a book, but it is densely packed with ideas. It is so good. I feel like once you get past the idea that perhaps studying is for men and women should bring him a sandwich while he's studying, once you get past that part of it, I just feel like it really helps give you a vision for what it's like to pursue the intellectual part of your life. You know, if we said, I want to pursue a more spiritual life, we have these ideas about spiritual disciplines that we would say, if I want to pursue a more spiritual life, then these are the things I need to do. I need to pray. I need to read my Bible. Right? Like we have all these things. And the same with a physical life. Like if I said, I want to have a better physical life, then Abby would like write me some sort of plan. Right, Abby?
Yes, happily.
So, but I felt like there's not a whole lot for the intellectual. Like everybody's just like, read a book. And there's something to that. But he really has this organizing structure and considers all the different aspects of it and what it really takes to have that as a habit in your life for the long haul.
Mm-hmm. And I love it because he tells you also to go on a walk.
Yes.
So I heard about this book from a class on restful learning that Pam and I took from Dr. Perrin, I think before the Scholé Sisters was a thing.
Yep. Wow. That's a long time ago.
So I bought it because he was referencing it several times and said that it was such a great book. So I immediately bought it. And then like a couple of years later, I picked it up and actually started to read it. And right at the beginning, he's trying to say that you can be an intellectual without it being your full-time job. But the way he says it is that you can have an intellectual life on only 2 hours a day. And I think I had a toddler and a baby at the time and wasn't sleeping through the night. I might have literally thrown the book across the room. I was like, well, whatever. This book is not for me.
Hilarious.
So I gave him a chance a few years later and realized it was actually a great book.
So our number one tip is don't pick it up while you're sleep deprived.
Yeah, your kids are a little older to read this one.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And I think you can also, when he says 2 hours, substitute 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And everything still actually applies.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it would be really nice to have 2 hours, but most of us don't.
Right.
A lot of his tips will reinforce the habit regardless of how long it is, as long as it's a long enough chunk of time to have an actual thought.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I am looking forward to recording another 100 episodes with you ladies.
Amen. This has been one of my favorite things. I'm glad you all said yes when I said, hey, we should have a podcast. I really do appreciate each and every one of you. And I mean, I know it's a podcast, but I'm like, this has been a wonderful adventure and I never want to be on it with anybody else. So.
Aw.
That's a lot of feelings for this group there, Brandy.
I know.
Watch yourself.
It's not going to happen again.
Pam and Misty are squirming over there.
Yeah, really.
I was just going to say ditto.
Yeah, there you go.
But I feel like it had hearts drawn around it.
Yeah. With little X's and O's. Yeah.
There you go. Okay, group hug, and we'll be back to our normal emotionless self. Just kidding. Next time. We won't let this happen again, I guess is what I'm saying. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening and being a part of the sisterhood of the podcast. Make sure you're following us in your favorite podcast player so you don't miss any of this season. We've got plenty special planned just for you. All of the books and things mentioned in today's episode are linked in our show notes. Just go to scolesisters.com/SS100 to check it out. Don't forget that you can come join our reading and discussion about Karl Marx and the world around us inside the Sistership. We're even having a live event today, and depending on what time you're listening to this, you might be able to join us. Sign up over at scolesisters.com/sistership. Once you're inside, go to seminars and look for the Excellent Marxmanship seminar. That's where the party's going on. In our next episode, we're discussing a bit of a lesser-known book by Joseph Pieper called Abusive Language, Abusive Power. I think you'll find it very interesting. Until then, we want to remind you once again that homeschooling is a marathon you needn't run alone, so open up your eyes and look around you. Find your sisters.
Well, you probably can't drive right now, right?
Well, legally. Mm-mm.
But illegally, it's okay. I'm going to have to go talk to my children. I'm sorry for interrupting. They keep pounding on the door.
Oh, get on, Abby.
Like, it's also not an episode until Abby has to school her kids.